research.
I can tell you that maybe part of the reason I've repressed this is because I was very unhappy teaching the section.
Really?
And I was unhappy because some students were doing so poorly, I wanted to flunk them. And I was told I couldn't.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Everybody had to pass.
Huh.
And I found that hard to
Yeah.
deal with.
Yeah.
Especially when students were, it wasn't that just they were having trouble getting it, it was that
Really?
they were slackers. They were blowing off the course.
Uh-huh.
So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. So what about some of your other experiences as a student? Well, I hope some were better.
Oh, absolutely. You know, my dissertation experience was great.
Mm-hmm.
I had, there was really not such a thing as reproductive epidemiology at the time, so I cobbled together a committee that was my chair, Michelle Ibrahim, and Dick Udry, who was the head of the Pop Center,
Yes.
a famous demographer, a guy named Bill Brenner, who was an obstetrician and a research guy,
Uh-huh.
actually terrific mentor for me, Sherman James, who was also fantastic, and the main guy was somebody named Ian Russell, who was a Brit who was doing a sabbatical that year in Chapel Hill. And I needed a statistician, somebody more mathematically able than me to help me with the problem I was working on. And Michelle suggested I go talk to Ian Russell.
Ian Russell.
And he and I became friends as well as colleagues. In fact, he and his son, of whom I'm the godfather, were here last summer to visit.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so
Wonderful.
yeah, that's been a wonderful kind of professional into friendship connection. So yeah, so there were really great faculty who I was working with closely in my obsession with my dissertation, and then the departmental seminars were really good.
Mm-hmm.
One that stands out is Al Tyroller leading a discussion about, I'm not going to remember the details of this, it's so long ago, but the controversy about exogenous estrogens and endometrial cancer.
Yes, I remember that question.
Yeah, and there were Feinstein was bringing up all of these.
Horowitz and Feinstein.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yes.
All these.
I remember your anecdote about the editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine that I think Horowitz wrote.
Oh yeah. Right.
I think you said you read that, or you read the study. Maybe it was you read the study that Horowitz and Feinstein came out with, and you were persuaded.
Yeah.
And then you read the commentary by Ken Rothman, I think, and you were persuaded.
Yeah, I know. and actually, that particular discussion with Al Tyroller turned out to be seminal for me, because I was so confused. I thought, how am I ever going to be an epidemiologist? I can't figure out what's right or wrong. And I remember staying afterwards and catching Al. And I said, so what's the truth? And Al was really good. He said, I'm not sure, but it seems reasonable that there's really a cause and effect here. And I think that's how it's going to play out. And what that showed me is that epidemiology wasn't just knowing the right answer. There's an element of judgment that comes with experience. And so if I couldn't figure it out as a student, that doesn't mean I couldn't gradually acquire some of that perspective that the more senior people had.
Yeah, and that was a topic that I got involved in a bit, not as a researcher, but so Barbara Hawke, of course, got very involved in that, and I think we used it as a doctoral qualifying exam topic once, which I was involved in helping to write that year.
Yeah.
It was, so I talked to her a lot about it, and it was a fascinating topic to watch develop over the years.
Absolutely.
Very good
Yeah.
teaching example in epidemiology.
Right. Yeah.
You know, one thing though, you were talking about your committee, and you named your committee members. Were they really all men? Am I forgetting somebody?
They were, every one of them.
And the topic was low birth weight.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem, nowadays, could you do that?
Well, nowadays there would be more opportunities to find women.
Right.
How many women were on the faculty at that
Well,
time?
I was wondering. Of course, there was Barbara Hulka.
Barbara.
Caroline Becker.
Carolyn Becker.
Joan Cornoni had left by then, I think.
She was
Joan
not
Cornoni
there.
Huntley.
Right. And actually Joan would have been a candidate.
Well, she would have
because
been great with her biostatistical.
Right. And
background.
she was interested in biostatistics, which I was using a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Carol Hogue, but I guess, was she not on the faculty
She had
then?
left by that time. She was
Oh.
there the first year, but she went to, where did she go? Arkansas.
Oh, okay. So maybe, I'm not remembering another, maybe that was part of the reason. But there were elsewhere in the university.
Yeah.
You could have gotten an MCH faculty member, for example.
Yeah, right.
I assume there were women there. I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe I'm biased. I don't know.
Well, no, you're the student. But I mean, it's just interesting
Yeah.
to think about that.
Yeah.
And you know, before we started, I asked you about the number of students who were women and men.
Mm-hmm.
And my year in '77, there was one woman out of 20 students, which
It's a lot different than today, isn't it?
it's a lot different today. Women have been 2/3 or 3/4 now for years.
I
But
gave a lecture at the department yesterday, and
Oh,
there was
really?
not a man in the class. It was all women.
I didn't know that. I would have gone.
Yeah.
There were some statistics I saw from '75, '76 where it seemed that the majority were women, a large majority. And Debbie Wynn, I wrote to her to ask.
Oh, right.
I said, so, you know, was this total anomaly? And she said there were a lot of women in her entering class. So, and you said there were a number of women in yours. So
There were,
I don't
right.
know what happened my year. I must have frightened them all away, or
Well, I think, you know, if you just look, there's got to be random, you know, variation. But there's been such a shift in our field. It was, you know, it was entirely male-dominated and physician-dominated.
Mhm.
Through the 50s. There were a few women who were prominent. Barbara was a very unusual person of her cohort.
Well, and Caroline Becker, and they were both physicians, of course.
And they were both physicians, right? And, you know, outside there's Zena Stain, who, you know, was
Mhm.
somebody I greatly admired. But, they were a real minority
Mhm.
at that time.
So a little bit more on your student days. So was ESO, the Epidemiology Student Organization, in existence?
I think it was.
Every year?
And I didn't have any
That's not something
connection
you
to
were
that.
involved in.
No.
Okay. And maybe so we can record it, you mentioned that we were students together, and there was an incident in the Epi student room that you mentioned once. If you feel like recording that or not.
Yeah, sure. This is what I get for having somebody who knows me interview me. So, right, we had a student room that had all these little carols side by side. And this is a time when I had 2 little kids. And my life was, you know, full, as it is when people have little kids. And I often didn't get enough sleep at night. And so I would sometimes try to catch a nap in the student room. And I could do it because at certain times in the afternoon there weren't many students around. And so the carols had partitions that didn't go all solidly to the floor. They were kind of carved out at the floor level. So I could crawl under the desk and stretch out under 3 carols and take a nap, and nobody had to know I was there. I kind of set up the chairs so nobody could see me. And I had just settled down to take a nap one afternoon, and the phone rang in the student room, and Vic answered it. And the phone was for me. And my recollection, you may have to correct me on this, but my recollection, I was so embarrassed of being hiding under the desk that when I heard Vic say, "No, he's not around, I'll leave him a message," I just stayed where I was and let you leave a note on my desk, and then I reached up and got it. made sure it wasn't anything I needed to interrupt my nap for. Does that fit with your recollection?
Well, I didn't remember the incident until you reminded me.
Oh,
of
okay.
that.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I do remember how wonderful it was to know you as a student and the things that you were able to tell me, not only as a student who'd been in the program longer than I, a more advanced student, but also as a physician and with your experience and so on. I learned a lot from you and from Hal Morgenstern.
I was going to say, we learned a lot from each other.
Mm-hmm.
That student room was I felt like Hal was the de facto biostatistical consultant for all the rest of us. I don't know how he ever got his dissertation done, because he was constantly helping people understand what, logistic regression, the new thing of the time, right? And, all the intricacies of analysis,
Now, what did you do for advanced epidemiologic methods, the course after 160? Was there a 268 in your era?
I think there was, and I can't remember.
Because I've been looking back at the records. Al Tyroller taught it 1 year at least, maybe more. And Dave Kleinbaum started teaching it, I'm not sure when, whether it was, actually I think it would have been spring of 77. Because I took it from him in spring of 78, and I know that in the back of the room there were all these epi students who'd taken it the year before who were coming back for a second try.
So David may have taught that course. I know I took a course with him, and that may have been the one. And he was trying out his new textbook. He was trying out. It hadn't been published yet.
He was handing out chapters.
Yes.
Yeah, that was probably it then.
Oh yeah, that was a good course. I really did like that.
He retired as of yesterday.
No.
Yeah, at Emory.
Oh my gosh.
48 years of teaching.
Wow. Yeah, he was a committed teacher.
So you had advanced methods probably with him, and do you remember who the teaching assistant was?
I don't.
Was Larry Cooper teaching with David that year?
He might have been, because I knew Larry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that might have been the context.
Okay. Let me see if I had any other questions. Oh yeah, what about the social life in the department? Did you all have picnics and skits and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Joyce Allen was kind of the registrar for the department, and she was fantastic at sort of being the impresario of pulling together these annual faculty-student parties where we did skits and songs and all these silly things. And I would, I never had the imagination to organize these things, but Joyce would say, I think you'd be great doing this. And, we would take it on and it was sometimes making a little fun of the faculty and sometimes making fun of epidemiology, and they were it was music and skits and great fun. It was really something I look forward to every year.
I'm still hoping that somebody who hears some of these is going to call in and say, well, I have a video
or
an
wouldn't
audio.
that be great? Yeah.
There is one recorded skit.
Is that right?
Actually, that I have on the website now. It was from years later when it was a lot easier
to do videos. Yeah, sure.
It was, you remember Marilyn Vine? Did you know?
Oh, yeah.
So Marilyn Vine wrote this one, and it was an enactment of a play she called Epidemiology Squares, or a game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Magic Squares game or something on television, or there was at the time. And something. Anyway, so she wrote this thing called Epidemiology Squares, and Barbara Hulka was one of the stars.
Oh, that's so great. And
I'll show you the link afterwards.
Yeah, and I actually continued to participate in those after I graduated, because I was, of course, working in the area. And Joyce would call me up and say, "How would you like to do this?" And I'd say, "Sure." And even for a few years afterwards, I had a chance to be part of that.
That's terrific.
Yeah, that was fun.
So how did you get to NIH? How did that work?
Oh, right, another completely unplanned thing. So when I finished my epidemiology stuff in the May of '79, Claire was just starting her residency in radiology at Chapel Hill. So we were passing the baton, and I was going to take care of our kids, and I needed to find a job in the area. So Sherman actually advised me not to take a job at UNC. He said, "I think it's going to be much better for you
Mm-hmm.
if you find a job someplace else, at least for a while. And this is before postdocs, right?
Mm-hmm.
All my cohort went and got university jobs. That's the supply was much less than the demand. And so I went to RTI and I interviewed for a job there, and then I heard that there was some job at this NIEHS, which I had never heard of and didn't know what that was. And I went to talk with them, and they actually were interested in developing a reproductive epidemiology program, even though nobody knew exactly what that would be. But they didn't have any positions. So they said, we can offer you a 1-year temporary job to come over and see if you can put together some research that might be interesting. And I thought, well, I've got nothing better to do. I've got,
Postdoc.
It's a postdoc. Yeah, that's right. And the fact it's 1 year, it doesn't matter. I don't have any long-term, great plans, and I'm going to be mostly trying to hold the household together. So I said, that'd be great. And Walter Rogan was already there. He'd been there for like maybe 2 years. Dale Sandler arrived the same week I did. Richard Everson, who was a cancer epidemiologist physician, arrived just a month before or after, I can't remember. So the 4 of us were the epidemiology program at the Institute, and had, they were all really smart people, and helped me to learn, it was really a postdoc for me. It was learning on the job, because my PhD was all analyzing existing data, very conceptual, and I didn't know anything about the practicalities of doing a study. And so I kind of learned on the job. And at the end of the year, they said, well, we've got a position if you want to stay. And I said, yeah, I'm having fun, I'll stay. And then after a couple more years, this is going to make any young epidemiologist today weep, but it's true. I was in the cafeteria, and the guy who was my boss came over to me. I was standing in line with my tray, and he said, we're going to give you a permanent position. And he said, you just have to decide whether you want to be a civil servant or in the public health service. And then he walked away. And so I
Who
talked.
was that?
That was Dave Hull, who was a biostatistician. He was a member of the Institute of Medicine. Very smart guy. For me, he was a perfect boss. Gave me a lot of freedom, inspired confidence, and let me acquire confidence in myself. And so I talked to the personnel people, and they said, well, these 2 jobs, they pay about the same. The public health service has 6 weeks of vacation. The civil service has 2 weeks of vacation. I said, fine, I'll take the 6 weeks of vacation. I've got so many things at home that I need to take care of. I need to be able to have that flexibility. So I joined the public health service, never figuring I would stay long enough to retire. But there it was. And, I kind of fell into doing a study that worked, and then another study that worked, and it was a fantastic environment because it was like a university without student obligations, without committee obligations. It was do good research, publish good papers. That was all that mattered. And so I was one happy camper, and have been, still there.
Mm-hmm. I'm reflecting on this 2 weeks vacation. Is that all it is for people who
are starting
in civil service?
Yeah,
for how many years? Oh, but it does go up, I hope.
It does go up, right. But I was impatient.
Yeah, well, it's a hard offer to take that.
Yeah, right.
But so you were a public health service. You could have been mobilized at any time.
In theory.
In theory.
Right.
Hurricane or
Yeah.
Ebola.
They were smart that they didn't actually require me to demonstrate my clinical skills because they were pretty primitive. It was in the era just before I joined the public health service. It was known as the Yellow Berets. That was where the guys who were trying to escape
They'd escape the
Vietnam
Vietnam
would go to the
Oh
go
yeah, I
to
forgot to ask you
NIH.
about Vietnam.
Yeah,
You would, because,
I would have gone if I hadn't gone to medical school.
but then didn't you get into the doctor's draft, or had it stopped by then?
It stopped by the time I finished.
Mm.
So, I would have gone, and I probably would have had to do, real clinical work.
Yeah, yeah, that was a fortunate escape.
Lucky for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since you've told the story of your time at NIHS in their interview, I'm going to come back to some of the other things that I didn't hear there. So you've actually been involved pretty heavily with the epi department since your graduation, besides the skits.
Right. No, it's actually been one of the great advantages of being at NIHS in the Research Triangle, 20-minute drive from Chapel Hill in the old days. Now
Yes.
more like 30 or 35 minutes plus parking. But it was close enough that I could have all this opportunity to interact with students and have doctoral students. And I taught a seminar there for a number of years. So it was
Reproductive epidemiology.
yeah, right. And so it was a fantastic part of my education to be close enough to the school. I could go to lectures, I could go to seminars, I could teach, I could have students, and not have the full burden that I would have if I were a faculty member. Since I was unpaid, I could say no, so I had the best of all worlds. I could do just as much as I wanted to do, and not the stuff that wasn't so attractive.
And you actually helped to develop NIHS as somewhat of a research laboratory for epidemiology doctoral students. You've had quite a few of them.
Yeah, we had